So I would like to take this chance to introduce Professor Cao. Now, we are very honored to have invited Professor John Cao to talk about biotech, why Hong Kong this evening. Professor Cao is head of Biomedical Technology Cluster of the Hong Kong Science and Technology Parks Corporation. He formulates the cluster strategies and business plans, drives the development of BMT cluster, covering therapeutics, diagnostics, health informatics, medical device, and incubio programs. He is also an enabler to influence various critical stakeholders on the regulatory affairs to support the biotechnology's growth and build the BMT ecosystem in Hong Kong. Also, Professor Cao is the chair professor of Translational Medical Engineering and the immediate past vice president and pro-vice chancellor global at the University of Hong Kong. He has led the Hong Kong Youth Global Networks of collaboration, built key relationships with relevant stakeholders in the mainland China and overseas, maximized opportunities across teaching and learning, research and knowledge exchanges, and deepened the university's presence and engagement worldwide. Now, without further ado, I would like to pass the floor to Professor Cao. Let's give a very warm welcome to Professor Cao, please.
Thank you, Cecilia, for that very generous introduction. So right now I will share my screen and get the discussion started. So thank you again, Cecilia and Daniel, for the opportunity for me to talk about two of my favorite things, biotech and Hong Kong. And I hope in the next 25-30 minutes, I can paint a picture for you to describe the ecosystem here in Hong Kong, where we are today and where we aspire to be in the near future. So as everybody here can appreciate that there are critical elements to create a vibrant INT ecosystem. And I would beg to argue that Hong Kong has many of these fundamentals. First, we need a robust capital market, and Hong Kong Stock Exchange about a year and a half, 2 years ago, launched a Chapter 18A, which is a pre-revenue IPO opportunity for companies to raise funds through this Hong Kong exchange. We need talent, obviously, the source of innovation, the source of entrepreneurship spirit, and that innovation can do culture that seep throughout the ecosystem. Obviously, we need critical infrastructures. As we know, biotech is a very laborious, long process. Various infrastructures are needed. Access to market and market adoption is another critical element. And policy support, particularly in IP protection, in terms of transparency and protecting the intellectual property that companies spend hours and a tremendous amount of resources to develop. And so in my talk, I basically will highlight 4 key points to talk about Hong Kong's advantage in biomedical technology. The first 2 is about talent and is about public commitment. So some of you may know that Hong Kong is a relatively small city of 7 million, but it has 8 publicly funded comprehensive universities, 4 of which are ranked in the top 50, and that this represents a tremendous source of innovation, great ideas, and talents. In addition to that, we have hospitals here that are accredited and that the data are accepted by the major regulators around the world, including FDA, EMA, and NMPA, across multiple subspecialties. So this is a fantastic place for you to explore, to launch clinical trials, starting from phase 1 all the way to phase 4, to explore these markets. In terms of public commitment, Hong Kong government in the recent years have committed large sum of resources in this to build out this ecosystem, particularly in healthcare technology, AI robotics, smart city, and fintech. And a lot of these resources are channeled through Science Park to build out relevant research infrastructures and to support companies inside the park. Furthermore, the government has committed quite a large amount of resources to develop collaborations with international universities to not just doing basic research, but in the commercialization of these activities, particularly in the area of health and AI and robotics. There are other resources that are pouring into other funding schemes for infrastructure building, as well as talent schemes and different funding opportunities. So I'm here to really talk about Hong Kong Science and Technology Park, HKSTP. It's arguably the highest concentration of R&D and commercialization activities here in Hong Kong. Basically, it's a platform that brings together all the major stakeholders, including universities, research institutes, the capital market, strategic cooperation, as well as government agencies. And one thing I want to point out is that these are bidirectional relationships. For example, we're at the receiving end of a lot of important regulations, but at the same time, we also provide advice to the regulators and government agencies on how to bolster this ecosystem. So specifically in the biomedical technology cluster of Science Park, it represents a rather healthy mixtures of technology domains. Everything from traditional Chinese medicine, to pharmaceutics, to medical devices, and diagnostics. We have about 150 plus companies to date. The number may not be all that impressive in terms of the actual number, but 5 years ago, there were less than 20 companies. So in a relatively short period of time, there is almost 700% growth in this BMT cluster in Science Park, representing that a lot of innovators and entrepreneurs recognize something really special about Hong Kong, and this is where they want to come and to do their R&D activities and eventually be successful. So exactly what we do in Science Park can basically be highlighted with something we all rather familiar with, which is the translation from basic science to clinical knowledge to health decision-making and clinical practice. And we know that this is a very long journey, hence the phrase Valley of Death is coined. So what we do here is to help companies develop from discovery to development stage to preclinical, clinical, market authorization, and even post-market lifecycle management. As we know, as companies go through this development continuum, the valuation goes up and the benefit to the public goes up. So Science Park has been charged with a mandate to facilitate this process for companies all over in Hong Kong as well as around the world. So to do that, obviously we need several things in place. So allow me several minutes to highlight some of our programs And let's start from the beginning, the incubation stage. As we know, innovators and entrepreneurs at the early stage requires all sorts of services and support. And IncuBio is a program, it's a 4-year program to do just that. In addition to the funding, we provide shared equipment and facilities, regulatory supports, connection to industries, not just in Hong Kong, but in the region, including the Greater Bay Area, as well as Mainland China, access to talent, connecting them to the capital market, including fundraising, coaching. How do you talk about your technology to potential investors within 30 seconds? You know, these are skills that needs a lot of work and to develop over time. In different professional services, everything from financial services to legal services and that sort of thing. So this is a whole suite of service that we provide to the incubatee through a admission process. As the company grows, we have another program called Elite Incentive Program. So this is for the bigger players who are looking at a growth stage where we will provide additional funding support to cover OPEX and CAPEX on a matching basis. As we know in biotech, researchers need high-end equipment as well as technicians and well-trained experts to generate all that critical proof of concept data. And we know that these equipments are very expensive and that a lot of companies, small, medium-sized companies may not be able to afford them. So Science Park stepped in by building shared facilities, offering the latest state-of-the-art equipment in microscopy, spectroscopy, genomics, proteomics, etc., etc. We do not generate revenue from this. It's totally a cost recovery model, so we pass the saving back to the company. In addition to that, we also offer co-working space to create that physical community that entrepreneurs really look for. As we know in biotech, whether you're working on devices or working on drugs, there's a lot of infrastructure that's needed. As I mentioned earlier, this is where Hong Kong government step up the game by providing support for Science Park to offer these kind of services. So recently we have launched a biobank and a bioinformatics platform. This will provide quality and secure services for the R&D companies in this area. And by the end of this year, we will be able to open a drug safety center. This will be a first ever in Hong Kong, a GLP facility to do all that important preclinical validation work, allowing companies to have the data they need to step into the clinical phase. And within the next few months, a GMP facility for ATP, Advanced Therapeutic Product, will come online, focusing on cell therapies, everything from CAR Ts to stem cells. So we're very excited about all these platforms. Here's a little bit more information on the biobank and the bioinformatics. The data will include everything from medical imaging to genomic information to patient-generated health data, and so on and so forth. And the platform offers that security that researchers and data owners and the patient themselves demand. So these will be operated with the highest level of security and for access, and as well as for the usage of this information. And another facility for those companies working in medical devices, as we know, for medical devices to go from basic research to prototyping to pilot batch to preclinical, clinical, production, so on and post-market. It requires multiple stages of verification and validation. And such a facility does not exist in Hong Kong, and we're building one. And this platform will come online later this year to facilitate companies to generate those critical data, whether it's mechanical testings or a material characterization studies. And the program that we're also very excited to announce in the coming months is a clinical translation catalyst. As I have mentioned earlier, for company to traverse this development continuum from the preclinical to the clinical stage, this represents a very critical transition for the company. And this is usually very daunting for small companies or even for big companies. So this is a program that will provide consultancies and funding opportunities to enable companies to make that preclinical to clinical transition. In addition to funding, we will provide advice and consultancies for regulatory planning and how to navigate this regulatory landscape, whether it is in North America, in the US, through the FDA, or in mainland China through MDTL. So once the companies are well positioned, they might look for other opportunities and other creative companies to create solutions specifically to a clinical need or market demand. So Medical Technology Integration Consortium, or Medicom for short, is an open innovation platform for co-creation. And this really addresses the mega trend in healthcare, which is a total integration following the patient's journey from prevention to diagnosis to treatment to monitoring and to rehabilitation. So this is a platform that we want companies working in these different domains to come together to co-create new solutions that will support the patient's journey. And lastly, we have a platform called Healthy Aging Platform. Hong Kong is an aging society, and with it, it has a lot of aging-related needs. Some are medical, some are health, some are mental health. And this is a platform where we connect solution seekers such as hospitals, NGOs, and nursing homes with solution providers such as companies inside Science Park working in these areas. So it provides a win-win situation where the solution seekers will have access to state-of-the-art new solutions. And then the solution providers, the companies, will understand what the market actually is asking for, what the patients actually need, so they can have more direction in terms of developing their products and services. And finally, Science Park, we have a corporate venture fund. So this is a fund that Science Park acts as a co-investor, focusing basically on seed and Series A round. And we've used this to help companies leverage additional fundings from the capital market, the robust capital market of Hong Kong. So from our experience, every dollar Science Park put in, we were able to leverage that and bring additional $13 for the company. So this is a tremendous leveraging power for companies to generate the necessary fund for them to continue their R&D activities. So in a nutshell, this is if I could ask, this is the slide that will sum up everything that I've been talking about. So we know that the journey is difficult and long and risky, from basic science to clinical use. And we're here to help you de-risk and facilitate these type of R&D. We have the 4-year incubation program for the early startup companies. We have core instrumentation and co-working facilities. We have large facilities that are needed to advance the R&D work, including biobank, histopathology, and bioinformatics. A GLP drug safety center will come online fairly soon, as well as the advanced therapeutic GMP facility all first in Hong Kong, and the medical device testing lab, and the clinical translational catalyst program. And for the later stage companies, we have the Healthy Aging Platform, as well as the Open Innovation Platform, the Medical Integration Consortium to support the patient's journey. And on top of that, we have talent development, investment, BD, market access, and regulatory services. So it's no longer a valley of death, but a solid ground for entrepreneurs to walk from discovery through development and to application. And lastly, for those who might not be familiar, I just want to touch on the Greater Bay Area. So basically, Hong Kong is located in southern China. And this region, about an hour radius, is what's called the Greater Bay. And it's an area with 66 million people, very young and fast growing. It has a GDP of 1.3 trillion US dollars. So that is about the half of South Korea, or I think about a third of UK. So it's a tremendous, it's a region with tremendous opportunities in terms of medical needs as well as business opportunities. So centrally located in the Greater Bay Area and capitalizing on all the advantages in Hong Kong and what Science Park are trying to do, we feel that this is really an exciting time for startup companies, whether it's through the Imagine If program that you are running, or investors or incubators or talents or industry partners or institutes, to think about Hong Kong as a place for their business as well as their R&D activities. So thank you once again, Cecilia and Daniel, for this wonderful opportunity to talk about two things I really care about, biotech and Hong Kong. And here's my email address. And feel free to email me directly if you have any questions or if there's anything you want to know, so we can continue the conversation. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Kang. Your presentation has indeed illustrated the processes of knowledge transfer, not just transfer, but knowledge creation, knowledge transfer, knowledge sharing, and also the development of innovation and entrepreneurship ecosystem in the biotech. And we appreciate your generous support. So may I now invite Mr. Andy Wong. So Mr. Wong is the head of innovation and technology of Invest Hong Kong. So Mr. Wong leads a team of technology specialists with major focus on attracting and facilitating overseas investments in Hong Kong for setting up and expanding their operations in the form of sales and marketing, regional headquarters, R&D, and innovation center. His key focused technology clusters include biotech, biomedical, medical devices, healthcare services, AI, and robotics, microelectronics, and smart manufacturing. Mr. Wong has wealth strategy consulting and business development experience in the technology sector. Prior to Invest Hong Kong, Mr. Wong was a consulting director at PwC, a leading consulting firm, where he led the technology consulting team to provide a broad spectrum of multi-industry consulting services. His expertise spans across business strategy, market analysis, due diligence, financial and business plan. Mr. Wong was a strategy director at Cisco Systems, a global 500 corporate where he led the Greater China consulting team to help multinational corporations to undertake business transformation through applications of advanced technologies. So let us give a very warm welcome to Mr. Wong, please. Mr. Wong.
Let me share my screen first of all. Okay, so can you hear me, Cecilia?
Yes, I can hear you clearly.
Okay, so good evening for those people who are in Hong Kong, and also good morning for those people who are in the UK. Thank you so much for Innovation Forum to have the chance for me to give a presentation tonight about the biomedical trends and development in Hong Kong. Let me start to move the slide. So to start with, so I want to, for those who are not familiar with Invest Hong Kong, we are the government agents to help companies to grow. We have a mission to attract and assist foreign companies to come to Hong Kong to serve the business. We having different kind of industry, and for my role, I'm looking after the innovation and technologies. For Invest Hong Kong, we have our office all over the world. We have 31 offices covering China, Asia, Europe, and America. And similar to Science Park, we work closely with our ecosystem partners, covering the government side, the technology park, including Science Park and also Cyberport. We work together with the chambers and also association, different incubator, accelerator, for the government funding and also the public funding as well, closely with the university and also research institution as well. From my part, I will cover three major portions. One is to talk about the current landscape, about the biomedical development in Hong Kong. The second part I will cover is more on the what we see from our client, the kind of the development in Hong Kong in this area. The third one will be a slightly touch on again about the Greater Bay Area, is because the Greater Bay Area definitely is the very exciting kind of opportunity for Hong Kong. So I will try to elaborate a little bit more about the Greater Bay Area. To start with the first part about Hong Kong. Hong Kong, as you can see from the very top, we are located in the Asia. So for those who are not familiar with about Hong Kong, from Hong Kong, we can reach out to over, within 4 or 5 hours, we can reach out to those of the country and cover about half of the population globally. From Hong Kong to China, we can go through the road for the land transportation through the Macau Beach and also the express railway link. Hong Kong stand out to be very simple and low tax rate. So the normal tax rate is about 16.5% for the first 2 million Hong Kong dollar profit. But about that, after that, there will be 16.5, but before that is 8.25%. Capital fundraising, we'll touch on about that topic later on. The leading IP system in Hong Kong, because we follow the British law, so leveraging the common law, so we have a good protection about the IP system. The Greater Bay Area, as Professor Cao mentioned before, we reach out 10 times of our population from Hong Kong. We have a very good ecosystem in terms of the startup ecosystem community. Here is the more overall picture about the biomedical development in Hong Kong. So I try to divide it into different phases, right? Coming from the early phase, the basic research to preclinical to clinical trial, and then the later on commercialization of the product. And then I look at it from different domains, from the academic side, from the government policy incentive side, from the private sector side, and also from the healthcare system in Hong Kong. So for the academic, as Professor Cao mentioned, that we have a very good university in Hong Kong doing the basic research in almost all area, and particular for the biomedical, which is the Hong Kong University and Chinese University, stand out to be quite good in this area. And in addition to that, I will touch on later one of the project called Hong Kong Genomes Project, which is doing the genomics study for Hong Kong, which is launched last year in May. And then for the preclinical, definitely Hong Kong Science Park offer a very excellent kind of facility to support this area. For the clinical trial, we have two very dominant clinical trial research center in Hong Kong. And then later on, for those medical device, for the science part, they are building the advanced manufacturing center. So for the manufacturing center can be manufactured in this center using the top-notch technologies. And also we have the Hong Kong Shenzhen Innovation Technology Park, which is run by the Hong Kong Science Park as well in the future. So this is all about the academic and research area. But for the government, we do have Inno Hong Kong, which is the more global collaboration for the research area. And then we have different funding, matching fund, kind of the R&D rebate, cash rebate offering for those to drive the development in the preclinical stage of the technologies. And if we move on to the government, and then Hong Kong definitely is a good environment to support any kind of development, leveraging the listing rules of the fundraising platform, the low tax rate, common law system, IP protection, professional service available in Hong Kong with the lawyer, accountant, etc. And then we have a free flow of capital, people, etc. And we'll touch on later on, there's some GBA facilitation measure, which is enable the closer collaboration between Hong Kong and the GBA city in the Guangdong area. For the private sector, we have different incubator helping the to drive the startup business. And we have the CRO in Hong Kong, or the pharmaceutical company is already in Hong Kong with the headquarters in Hong Kong. Healthcare system, we have a very efficient dual-track healthcare system in Hong Kong with two very predominant clinical trial center, as mentioned earlier. And then we have a more innovative kind of a smart hospital pharma revolution happening in Hong Kong. I will touch on a bit later. As I mentioned before about the dual track, right? So 90% of our public health is provided by the public and 10% by the private. And then we have a good electronic healthcare record sharing system. So whoever people who join this platform can share the patient records. Under the public sector, the overall policy driver is the Food and Health Bureau. And then we'll have the Department of Health. So whoever who want to register the drugs will go through the drugs office. And for the medical device will be registered under the Medical Device Control Office. Hospital Authority will look after the 43 public hospital in 7 cluster. And then Hong Kong is, because of the good health system, so we have a very long life expectancy in Hong Kong. For the clinical trial, right, as I mentioned, why Hong Kong? I think we already touched on, but just a highlight in here because we have a complete value chain, right? We start with the medical innovation by the university and also science park, and then move on to clinical trial, leveraging the simple clinical trial registration framework in Hong Kong. We have the experience, the CRO, and also the very KOLs people in Hong Kong. And for the bilingual spoken English and Chinese, it will help for doing the clinical trial in Hong Kong. And then we have the execution of the trial, which is synchronized. For the clinical trial is quality data, so it can be recognized by the FDA, EMA, and also NMPA in globally. Simple clinical trial because we run the regulatory submission and ethics committee in parallel. So we're trying to shorten the time frame to 4 to 6 months for the application to be approved. For drugs in Hong Kong, for those people who want to import the foreign drugs in Hong Kong, so we do not require the clinical trial, local clinical trial in Hong Kong. We rely more on the foreign company who has, for any drugs, if they have a recognized country marketing approval, then it will be qualified to listing the drugs in Hong Kong. Fundraising, we already mentioned about that. So just put some numbers to support it, right? So for the last 10 or 11 years, right? So we've been ranked #1 for the last 6 years globally. Why listing in Hong Kong? Because they can, for people who listed in Hong Kong, they can access to the global capital, global investor, institution, and corporate. And then we are very credible because the professional service we offer in Hong Kong is very credible. We are sustainable because we are not just talking about 1 year of IPO number one, but we have been 6 years in out of the 10 or 11 years. For the last 10 or 11 years, we've been number one. So we are adaptable because pointed out earlier is a Chapter 18A is a pre-revenue, pre-profit kind of scheme. So that's why we make Hong Kong to become the second largest IPO after New York for the biotech company. In the 2020, just last year, we have 21 companies listed under the Chapter 18A. So for the company who already passed FDA phase 1 clinical trial and then is qualified to apply for the listing with the market cap above 1.5 billion. Compared to the traditional, which is much requirement in terms of the profit or the revenue or the market cap. So maybe I focus a little bit more on this funding support by the government. So this slide is showing from the startup phase to the research and development phase, and then later on to the commercialization phase, right? For the startup, definitely Science Park will be a good place for the startup to go there and then leveraging the facility available, the consulting support, and then all other support offered by the Science Park. And then as Professor Cao mentioned earlier, they have the venture fund available in the Science Park, as well as a venture fund available by the government. If we move on to the R&D stage, right? So there's a couple of matching funds. So the top one is the Enterprise Support Scheme, which is a one-to-one matching by the government. And the Partnership Research Program, also one-to-one matching, but this one will require the enterprise to collaborate the research project with either the university or research institution. And then once it's qualified, is one-to-one matching. And then there will be other support for the tax deduction. So if you are the corporate who are doing the R&D, and then the first 2 million of R&D investment will have 3 times of the 2 million, which is 6 million of tax deduction, tax allowance for that one. And then after that will be 2 times of the remaining. Cash rebate, meaning that for those R&D expenditure, then later on is qualified, then you have a 40% of the total R&D investment rebate back to the corporate. If the company who hired talent to do the R&D projects, so there's a maximum of up to 4 talent can be hired for a maximum of 3 years. And depending on the degree of those people, for the doctor degree can go up to 32,000 per month for 3 years. And then there's also other policy that are available to help the R&D function development. And then later on, the government has different trial scheme or portal available to support the commercialization of the product. Here is just because I talk about so many schemes, right? So I just want to use an illustrative example to show how it works. So for example, if you look at the bar chart on the right-hand side, if you are talking about 20 million of project, so it's one-to-one matching. That's why the government will contribute $10 million, and then the corporate is supposed to contribute 10 million as well. But because of the R&D cash rebate, so you are entitled to have a 40% of the 10 million cash rebate back to the company who invests into the R&D. And then you can also apply for the salary subsidies, right? So it depends on who are the 4 people you hire. And then if we look at the 4 of them are all doctor degrees, and then there will be a certain salary subsidies, right? So by looking at this waterfall chart, right? So the actual company pay could be in this case, will be 2,928,000, right? So how does it mean? Which only represent 15%, 15% of the total project lump sum. So this is very attractive for a company corporate who is already making money and then leveraging Hong Kong to do the R&D and then apply for the R&D cash rebate and also the salary subsidies, right? So that's why you can just have the benefit of putting only 15% of the total lump sum to do a research project. The other couple of slides I just mentioned about what we see from our client, what are the development in Hong Kong in the healthcare service, right? So as we all know, we look at the whole life cycle, the healthcare life cycle. So from the prevention to diagnostic to treatment and rehabilitation, the government is driving it as well as the the private is also driving it. So you can see that it's a all daycare center available, rehabilitation center available, both offered by the government and also by the private. The Genomes project, Hong Kong Genomes project, right? So which was launched in May last year. It is a 1.2 billion Hong Kong dollar. It's doing whole genome sequencing for two purposes. One is for clinical application. The other is for more on the academic scientific research. And then they divided into two different phases for talk about 20,000 cases kind of patients, right? So the first phase will last for 1 year. They talk about mid of next year, 2022 to complete, talk about 2,000 cases to do. And then for the rest of 20,000, 18,000 cases will be spread over across the 3 to 4 years to complete that whole genome sequencing project to build up the database. Key stakeholder will be the government, the Department of Health, Hospital Authority, and public hospital of private hospital, together with the university. The benefit will be for the patient itself, for the rare disease kind of patient, they can have analyzing their genomes, and also the business benefit for any pharmaceutical company can make use of that database later on for research. And also through this whole genomes project, we can develop more talent in this area. And then the data will be allowed public to access at different level, 1, 2, 3. And then it depends on the requirement of this data. And then DNA analytics, right? So these are the kind we've been dealing with, and they're all in Science Park. So using the DNA for the analytics function. And AI has been using as well for the drug discovery and diagnostic, using the analyzing the image for the brain, for the X-ray, etc., and also for the drug discovery. Smart hospital, right? Next to the Science Park will have the Hong Kong Chinese University Medical Center. And also in this smart hospital, because Hong Kong is 5G enabled, so there will be operating theater for the tele-examination, and also different technology has been put into the hospital to make it smarter. That means that the medicine can be digitized for electronic medical record. Smart care, which is using the mobile apps to help the workflow by different doctor, nurses, etc. And teleconsultation has been increasingly adopted by Hong Kong. There's also apps which is rolled out recently by the hospital and also by the telco company to offer it as a driver for those chronic disease, right? So they will start to move on to the teleconsultation method for the follow-up cases. Robots, right? Robot is also used in Hong Kong as a delivery booth because of the COVID. So the robot has been used for delivering the food, the dinner, and also for the surgical robot. We're not just using the robot, but we also have a company who developing the robot in Hong Kong. I think the reason why using Hong Kong to develop the robot because of the financial government matching fund, because of the product development, the value chain that can be because of the GBA, so that they can gather the supply chain in the GBA area, and eventually the manufacturing can be done in Hong Kong or in GBA area, leveraging the CIPA, which is the one of the closer collaboration CIPA facilitated measure between Hong Kong and China. The clinical trial in Hong Kong, once it's been done, then can be recognized by the FDA and China NMPA, and the professional service in Hong Kong, which can protect the IP protection. So we see that some of the area why they select Hong Kong for the top-notch research. Also, Pharma Revolution, Kowalensky moved to Science Park in 2016, and then we see different stem cell innovation in Hong Kong, leveraging Hong Kong, the basic research capability. And also the traditional Chinese medicine in Hong Kong. So Hong Kong set up the funding about 500 million for the traditional Chinese medicine development fund to support. One is supporting the industry, the other is supporting the enterprise. We also have by 2024, we have the Chinese Medicine Hospital. serving 4 key purposes. One is to do the training. The other is doing the medical surveys to covering the primary care, secondary care, etc., and also clinical research, and using this medical hospital as a reference model in terms of how can we improve the patient flow, the information flow, etc. And then the last part of my presentation will cover the GBA area. So I think to start with, why the GBA? Because I think it's the central government realized that there's a strong synergy can be created by Hong Kong and the Guangdong area, which is, we call it 9 city. So the 9+2 concept is 9 city in Guangdong area plus 2 city, which including Hong Kong and Macau. So that's why we can increase the population to 10 times of our population, and the GDP will be 1.7 trillion, which is account for 11% of China total of GDP. The overall objective is synergy, is to stimulate the synergy. And then the strategic intent is 4 areas. One is innovation, making this whole area as an international innovation and technology hub. Commerce, building a world-class manufacturing logistic powerhouse, and then we increase our competitiveness to global, and we improve the livability, because Hong Kong is very high dense. So if people come to Hong Kong, and then they can also move to China to live over there, and then commute between Hong Kong and China. So this could be one way to resolve the living issue in Hong Kong. Just some figure to highlight how does it compare to other area. So it's a 9+2 GDP, a 9+2 concept, and then 11% of China total. And then you can see the 11 city app together is different land size and different population in this 9+2 city area. And if we compare the GBA, the Greater Bay Area, with other Bay we know in the world, like San Francisco, New York, and Tokyo Bay, actually we are doing a bit more than the other 3 because we are financial center in Hong Kong. We have a strong innovation technology, and also we can leverage the GBA for the manufacturing as a manufacturing basis. For the GBA, one more slide to highlight the importance, right? So the GBA, why it come up the GBA is the industrial cluster, the cluster that for the medical device development in China. So because the GBA is a new city, so adding more worker from outside the GBA area, from all over to China to this Greater Bay Area, the capital comes in, the innovation comes in, etc. And then Hong Kong, because of the financial center, university, law system, the tax, the geographical advantage, the hub, the logistic hub, and IP protection, all etc. add up together to put these 2 powerhouses all together into one. And then we have the underlying support enabler. Is the connectivity infrastructure, the facilitation measure, the policy driven to benefit both sides, and also the technology enabler. So that's why we kept the in China. So for the technology to develop in China, will be in China for China. And also we can cover the all Asian market as well. This is the highlight about the facilitation measure, which is the special policy, which is enable Hong Kong to work closely with the GBA. One good example is highlighted in the red color related to the biomedical field. So for Hong Kong, in the future, the Hong Kong registered drugs and the medical device that can be used in GBA, starting with the designated institution, which is the Hong Kong University and Shenzhen Hospital. So in the future, the drugs registered in Hong Kong and the medical device being approved in Hong Kong, that can be used in the GBA area in the future. And then at the end, to close up, so the GBA and Hong Kong and global, so Hong Kong has a very favorable policy between the 2 areas, and then the talent, and then the access to capital, business, environment. And for Invest Hong Kong, so we help our customer to through the whole customer journey from the planning stage to set up the business when they launch the business in Hong Kong and expansion in Hong Kong. So we help our client to go through the whole customer journey in Hong Kong. Hope that 20-minute presentation will give some idea about the development of Hong Kong. So feel free to reach out to me if any question or any help that we can support. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Andy Wong. Your presentation has provided us lots of guidance in seeking support from Invest Hong Kong. As well, there are many forward-thinking ideas in matching funds, business, and market development. We really appreciate your support. So at this point, may I invite Dr. Daniel Moreno and Dr. Maggie Palmer to moderate the QA session, please.
Right. Evening, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Maggie Pharma. I work for the UK Department for International Trade. So good. Hello. So a question for Professor Carl. Is there animal facilities in the science park?
At the moment, we are busy getting that set up. So as I mentioned, this will be a first in Hong Kong GLP facility to do drug safety analysis. As you know, that is a critical data that regulator want to see for drugs to advance to the clinical stage.
And my second question to you is, what's the relationship with the Hong Kong Science Park with the hospital authority and the private healthcare clinics? Because I get approached by a lot of the UK companies who are relatively new and they love to export, but then they do need a pilot study to showcase their efficacy. So and they always ask for healthcare contacts. So
That's right. That's right. Healthcare, I mean, hospital authority HA is a major stakeholder and a major collaborator for Science Park, and particularly my team. On several, let me just give you a few examples. You know, when they look for new solutions, they look towards us to make that connection. They might be seeking for solutions, and then we can make reference and point them to solution providers. Same thing with private hospitals. We work with several private hospitals. Again, is to facilitate whether or not if they are interested to launch a clinical trials, or they actually want to adopt some of the technology our companies are developing. So yes, we work with them very closely.
Well, that's fantastic. So we need to speak more then, I think.
Yeah, happy to.
Thank you. Andy, I know you had spent all the presentation talking about the advantages of overseas companies to set up in Hong Kong. In your view, what are the top 3 key advantages for overseas company to set up in Hong Kong?
Okay, several things. Market access, not only limited to Hong Kong or even Greater Bay, but it's a fantastic launching pad to enter Southeast Asia, ASEAN countries, as well as East Asia. So it's a good place to do your R&D with an eye on these huge markets. So market access. Another is access to capital. Both Andy and I have talked about Chapter 18A, and this is a huge capital market, still very vibrant despite COVID, despite a lot of uncertainties of the past years. And the third is talent. At the end of the day, is really the ideas, the people who can execute, that makes all the difference in the world. And we have a wonderful talent pool, but at the same time, Hong Kong continue to attract top talents around the world, beyond just finance and banking. I think more and more people are looking at Hong Kong as a place to do R&D in biotech and AI and robotics and other high-end technologies.
Thank you very much. Andy, do you have anything to add to incentivize overseas companies to set up in Hong Kong?
Yeah, I think it depends on different stage of the company, right? So if you are talking about the very early stage, right? So definitely the basic research and also the science park offering, the facility will definitely help them because they offer different incubation programs, right? And then for the R&D stage, right? So a little bit later on, and then the government funding definitely is very attractive. as I pointed out earlier, you just use 15% of the total lump sum, then you can run a good project. And also the project can be run by different universities together. So the talent is there, as Professor Carl mentioned. And also in the later stage, right? So it will be the IPO stage, right? Commercialization. So I think it depends on different stage, but at each stage, we do have a very good offering.
Something for everybody.
Yeah, something for everybody.
For both speakers, a question about how COVID-19 pandemics have accelerated the biomedical ecosystem and how has the government and industry have worked together. Any examples? Think of?
Yeah, I can take a crack at it. I think there are silver linings. I'm a forever optimist. The silver lining is that public is much more interested and aware of biotech, and they're very keen on how the vaccine is developed. They're very keen on how to prevent and diagnosis. So they follow the development, and that's a wonderful starting point to just talk more about tech. So the awareness is definitely heightened. And another is it actually kind of catalyze collaborations that normally won't happen. I mean, Andy kind of touched on this. Company working on robots now starting to look at how they can use these technologies, say, in nursing homes, you know, to help the elderly with social isolation and that they cannot talk to their family or have visitors, and how can we use robots and technologies to help them through this difficult time. So companies are becoming a lot more creative and finding new uses of their expertise, and that's why I mentioned about Medicom. This medical consortium is really about collaboration. It's really about finding new solutions.
Yeah, I think one of the other way is that the diagnostic. So I can remember we're helping one of the company who set up the temporary diagnostic in order to test thousands of cases. So and leveraging the experience come from China. So that is the very wonderful kind of success story in Hong Kong, that we are capable in a short time leveraging the experience from China to do the diagnostic. Yeah.
Maggie, just if you allow, sorry, it's Daniel again. I'd like to add something to this question, which I think it's interesting, and I'd like to hear the opinion of our presenters. And it's about how has COVID-19 impacted those startups that were in the middle of funding rounds. So, for instance, something that we observed in Europe and that the European Commission tried to address very early back in March was that investors were holding investment, especially in those startups that were not in their portfolio already. Talking about, investors looking at expanding their portfolio. So because of all the uncertainty, what happened is that investors were holding back their investment, and they were just trying to secure that whatever they already had invested in was working. Yeah, so that obviously created a shock for new enterprises, for new solutions that, of course, were not prepared for something like this. Yeah, so the European Commission reverted and created some sort of support programs to address this in one way or the other, or even to fund themselves, those startups, in a momentary manner. I would like to know whether this sort of impact also happened in Hong Kong, and what did you guys do? What did the country do to stop this or to address this? And with that answer, with the answer to that question, Maggie, I'll leave it back to you again. Okay.
Okay. Yeah, thanks for that.
It's a difficult one. It's a difficult one.
No. I'm just thinking, what's the best way to give you some concrete? Of course, you can find all sorts of examples investors holding back or investors actually continue. I think from the macroeconomic perspective, again, using the Hong Kong Stock Exchange as a barometer, just so you know that in 2019, the total volume of trade investment in the IPO market was $24 trillion, or is it 34? And then last year during COVID, that number, instead of going down, it actually went up almost 20% to about 47 trillion US dollars. So macroeconomic indicates that the capital market remained very strong throughout COVID, which means that the monies are still flowing. And not to say all these 47 trillion goes to biotech, but that's just give you the big picture that deals are still being made.
Yeah, to supplement, right? I think for the IPO, right? So we talk about Chapter 18A in the last year, right? As you can see that we still have 20-something of company who listed in Hong Kong Stock Exchange, which is talking about 53 billion Hong Kong dollar, right? So you can see that it's not stopping from the overall IPO market. But if in terms of the VC or PE fund, I do believe that they have a sort of a slowdown in that kind of investment. In Hong Kong.
Yeah, I mean, just from my personal experience, to add a little bit more color to all this, because of the heightened public awareness in biotech and biomedical technologies, there are more investors curious about opportunities, even though they might not be sophisticated investors in biotech, but we're getting a lot of inquiries. I can't guarantee all that can translate to dollars invested, but definitely that's a good indicator that when they're interested, they might just invest down the road. So we continue to reach out to them, to educate them, to let them understand the many challenges, but then the opportunities in biotech. Great question, Daniel.
Thank you, Daniel. A question, maybe example from me on how industry and government can work together is a company called Prenetics. They develop PCR and then the rapid, they do COVID testing. So they work with both the Hong Kong government and the UK government on producing, on delivering rapid COVID tests as well as the standard COVID test, and they responded very quickly, and that's I think a wonderful example. So
and just a plug, they are a science park company, and also Andy was talking about the Hong Kong Genome Institute. They're also physically located in Science Park, so it is really a high concentration of all these things, the epicenter, sort of.
Fantastic. Can't wait for the pilot study for the Genome project.
I know.
It's very exciting. As another question is about more to Professor Carr. There's a lot of talk on commercializing research. Do Science Park actually go into Hong Kong, you say, or to Chinese to nurture young researchers to commercialize their research? Because what we see is there's still a lot of young researchers focus on generating peer review papers, getting the grants, and that seems to be kind of still dominating the huge part of their work. I'm just wondering if this,
Yeah, absolutely. And they should continue to publish papers and be excellent and be the expert in their field. So to answer your question, these kind of engagement is never ending. It's never, there's never an end where we say, okay, now we don't need to do anything. This kind of engagement must be continuous. And there are several activities that Science Park engaged the local universities. We have a career fair, so at least they know this is a career path for them, R&D. As I mentioned earlier, the Hong Kong Inno centers will physically be located in Science Park. So these are joint collaboration between local university and foreign university, including Cambridge, Harvard, and others. They will be doing research in Science Park, not in university, just because the government and us want to create that ecosystem to facilitate commercialization. We have the IncuBio. Our colleagues sit in a lot of the grant review. I think Andy mentioned TISU, which is a funding mechanism for university entrepreneurs to form spin-offs. We're involved in the review process of that. And I mean, I can go on and on. There are a whole bunch of activities that we do with universities. And Science Park actually recently opened up a satellite office just near the HKU NTR station. So the work is never done, but there's a lot of channels that we have.
Oh, that's good. That's very good to know. That's excellent to know. So I think that's all from me. Daniel, do you have any questions?
No, I think that's probably everything. Maybe I just would like to ask about the sort of startups, the sort of startups that are coming from Europe. That maybe Andy, maybe you explained this in your presentation, and if it's so, I apologize. But what sort of startups do express an interest in touching base with Hong Kong? Where do they normally come from, and what are their expectations?
Let me try to answer first, right? And then Professor Gao can also supplement. So I think for the everywhere for the startup comes to Hong Kong, over the world for startup to come to Hong Kong, I think they look for is the facility available in Science Park, and also they look for the program, the incubation program with the funding they can achieve to get, and that is the most important. And also they will see that eventually they have a much bigger business opportunity in China. Because if you are in Hong Kong, first of all, you speak the Chinese language and also English language, so it's more easier to land in Hong Kong first, and then leveraging the kind of culture and also the system, and then the facility available in Science Park, and then later on, once you have your product ready, then the opportunity will be in China. So that is the whole overall the attractiveness for having starting in Hong Kong first. So maybe Professor, you have something.
Yeah, sure. Happy to elaborate. From my experience, as I mentioned, we run this IncuBio program, so that's one encatchment for entrepreneurs, local and overseas. And the ones that we commonly observed have a clear business strategy for at least mainland China or part of ASEAN. So, you know, they might be coming from the US or Canada or Europe, and they may have a clear plan already what they want to do in our neck of the wood. And so that's one thing, you know. So Hong Kong would make sense if the company has a clear Asia strategy, at least a mainland China strategy.
That's brilliant. Thank you. I don't have any more questions from my end. If anybody else, Maggie, if you want to ask any further questions, or if anybody else from the public does have any questions.
Yeah, I think in the chat box, there have been several very great questions, and I've been typing as I see them. So that's also another place where people, if they feel more comfortable, to ask questions.
One of the questions would be that what's the cooperation between government and startup in response to COVID-19?
Yeah, that's a very big question. I mean, as you can tell from the media or just around the ether, Hong Kong government is doing quite a bit to manage COVID-19, just like governments around the world. different strategies are being used as we learn more and more about the disease, its etiology, its underlying biology. So a lot of time, at least from Science Park perspective, companies are coming up with creative, innovative solutions. I mean, Maggie mentioned Planetics, who have a very good diagnostic system, but then there are also other companies developing similar things. So it takes a village to address this, and it takes a world village, actually.
Completely understand. A question to Andy. What's the competitive edge for of Hong Kong over mainland China in terms of tech commercialization?
So, sorry, what is the question? So
what's the competitive edge of Hong Kong over mainland China in terms of tech commercialization?
Tech commercialization. I think for the commercialization, right, the government do have some support on this commercialization in terms of some funding, some government procurement policy. Say, for example, the government will encourage the department to procure more the development based in Hong Kong, not just purely based on price, but based on the quality to procure, right? So, and then I think Hong Kong is a good center for servicing, because of the language we speak, right, compared to mainland China, and then the culture for those people. So if you set up a headquarters in Hong Kong to commercialize your product globally, then definitely it's easier to find the talent who can more adapt to the culture of Western culture, and then to speak the same language of this one. And then people feel more comfortable about the law system in Hong Kong. And also, if you want to have some professional service to support your business, right? Definitely, we have a lawyer, we have the accountant, which is the global standard. So, and then later on, if you are talking about the tax, definitely the much lower tax is simple. We have no VAT, no GST, etc. So the tax from tax perspective is better, and also IP protection, as I mentioned before, because people will feel more comfortable.
Thank you. I think that's...
Yeah, let me just add one more. I mentioned that IP protection is really critical, and from investors, from entrepreneurs, from companies' perspective, and Hong Kong legal system is very well established, and IP protection is that's why a lot of companies come to Hong Kong to do R&D. But then maybe the manufacturing and the market and the BD side, it's in mainland and ASEAN, but the secrets are kept in Hong Kong, so to speak.
One more, FIFO of capital. The money can flow everywhere. Yeah.
I think that's it. I think that's all the questions.
Thank you. Thank you very much to Dr. Palmer, Daniel, Professor Cao, and Mr. Wong. The discussions are highly interesting and fruitful. There are lots of food for thought. So to Professor Cao and Mr. Wong, thank you for sharing your informative and insightful presentations. In closing the webinar, we observe a lot of, Hong Kong has been investing on a lot of biotech industry in terms of research, knowledge transfer, human resources, and capital in strengthening the ecosystem. So as we all know, biotech plays an important role in value-based investing. And the value that one can get from investing in a company which has the potential to change people's lives. So with joint efforts of the Hong Kong Science Park, Invest Hong Kong, academia, and industry players, the biotech ecosystem in Hong Kong is growing from strength to strength. And with socially meaningful orientation and an organized, orderly market. As a gateway to the Greater China and Asia, Hong Kong as a market in biotechnology will continue to grow and prosper. And finally, once again, thank you very much for your contributions and participation. Before we leave the webinar, please turn on your screen so we could take a group photo. And thank you for your cooperation.